Welcome back to the Farm Show. That's Farm and Ranch, Missouri, right here on Westplex Talk 1045. A couple weeks ago, we talked about a press conference that Governor Mike Kehoe held, where he talked about two pieces of legislation really important to farmers and ranchers. And in fact, important to folks that weren't even farmers and ranchers. The first piece of legislation had to do with the ability of the Missouri Farm Bureau to sell health plans, to offer health plans to its members. The second piece of legislation had to do with water rights. Now, last week, at the end of C Block, we teased that we would have a policymaker who helped shepherd that legislation. In fact, did shepherd that legislation through the Missouri House. And we are joined by her today, State Representative Cameron Parker from Campbell, Missouri. Welcome to the Farm Show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Now, for folks who are driving around here in our four-county area, up here in Franklin County, Warren County, St. Charles County, and West St. Louis County, so that we can visualize a little bit better, can you tell us where Campbell, Missouri is?
So Campbell, Missouri is in the Boot Hill of Missouri. So it is in the Boot Hill on the western side, just almost probably 7 miles from the Arkansas state line.
So you're dangerously close to Arkansas.
Yeah, it's a stone's throw away.
And can you tell us, too, what crops do you grow down there?
Yeah, we grow corn, we grow soybeans, rice, and cotton.
Yeah, we're a few degree days shy of that up here in our area. And I wish we had, not in the summer, I wish we didn't have that heat, but I wish we had a few more degree days to grow some cotton. But I want to get into the most important thing that we'll discuss today. As I mentioned 2 weeks ago, we made reference to the Water Preservation Act. Can you tell us what the Water Preservation Act is and how that legislation came to be?
Yeah, certainly. So this was the Water Preservation Act was legislation that was passed this year and signed into law by Governor Mike Kehoe. And what it does is it makes it unlawful for any person to export water resources outside the state unless the person holds a water exportation permit. So it's establishing a framework for exportation of bulk water. And what the goal or the aim of this is to preserve Missouri's water resources. Several times throughout this process, I heard that how much our water in the state of Missouri, how much the abundancy of water that we have. But really the phrase I heard the most is that water is the new oil.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you look at some of our brethren in other parts of the country that are dealing with diminishing aquifers and a lot less access to that water. Now, how would folks go about getting a permit?
So what would happen? So the legislation sets up kind of, like I said, the framework. So the Department of Natural Resources, it will create the rules. They will create the water exportation permits, which is an application process through the DNR. It will have to there'll be information that will be provided, what is needed, and then like a public notice or comment section for Missourians to weigh in on how our water is being exported. But that will be an application process through the DNR.
And there will eventually, as you mentioned, there will eventually be opportunities for folks to weigh in on the law, right? As part of the lawmaking, or I should say rulemaking process, right?
Absolutely. So there's a 30-day window to submit public comments. But if this is affecting you or someone close to you, your area, your land, then you will have the opportunity to have a public comment. And we think that's very important. I think that's very important to allow Missourians to weigh in on how their water is being used.
And in terms of just the nuts and bolts of the legislation, you had a Senate sponsor of this legislation too, right? Who was that?
Yes, that was Senator Jamie Berger from Scott County, Missouri.
Okay, so
which is just a little north, and I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
And I think they grow a little cotton up there as well. So.
They sure do. Yeah, and so we had two boot heel leaders down there running that, right?
That's correct.
So oftentimes with legislation, authors of the legislation and sponsors of the legislation don't get 100% of what they want maybe the first time there's a go round, maybe there's some negotiations and they have to give a little, take a little. Is there anything about your final bill that you'd like to tweak in the coming years?
At this point, I don't anticipate any changes to this legislation or this bill. But that being said, as we work through this implementation process, I'm always open to revisiting areas that may need clarification or adjustment. Good policy requires both structure and flexibility, and, I'm committed to making sure that this law works effectively in practice. So this is something that as we go forward, we will continue to review. But as it sits right now, nothing that I want to change.
Okay. So when you think about what success looks like for this, how will you know a year from now, 5 years from now, maybe 10 years down the road, how will you know if this legislation was successful?
I think the success of this legislation will be maintaining the abundant water resources that we currently have right now. So, what we're trying to do is prevent misuse of our resources. And as other states are looking to kind of take advantage of our resources as they're depleting aquifers continue to dwindle, I think they will look to us. And the success is that we prevent misuse.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I'm sure you had a number of stakeholders that weighed in on this, and I know that you held committee hearings on this. You had plenty of floor debate on the topic, and you had a diverse set of voices weigh in. What did you learn about water rights when you went through this process?
I learned a ton about water rights. I was fairly familiar with Missouri's riparian water rights and our reasonable use, but I learned about our rights as the state of Missouri. I learned about other water rights in other states and how there are lots and lots of case law about water rights, and I learned about one thing that I was kind of shocked about is all of the pending litigation between other states. Like currently Nebraska and Colorado have a pending lawsuit about the Southern Platte River that crosses back and forth. So learned a lot about the active disputes going on out west specifically.
Is there anything that Missouri can or should do in that vein to protect its water rights? Like you mentioned the dispute between those states. Is there anything lawmakers could do to prevent something like that, or is that one of the things that this bill does?
That is exactly what this bill does. Is prevents Western states or other states the potential of that happening, where they come in and try to deplete our water resources, our natural resources.
I see what you mean. Now, are there any misperceptions that you hear about access to water or water rights or general water utilities that you've seen or heard that you consistently need to correct? Or are there any other misperceptions about water rights that you've encountered?
Well, as I kind of had spoken earlier, a lot of times the misperception that I heard this particular time was that water disputes don't happen here. That's out west. We don't have an issue. We don't have to really worry about that right now. And I disagree. I think Missouri's taking proactive steps to protect our water resources. Also, initially when this bill was first filed, it was kind of named the Water Exportation Bill. Well, that is that is not what this is doing. This is not an avenue to mass export water, bulk water. This is a bill to preserve our water. And so that was one of the biggest things that we had to tackle initially.
I can imagine someone reading Water Exportation Act, particularly if you're a little bit, leaning toward the conspiracy theorist side, and you would think, what in the world are our legislators trying to do, export our water?
Right, and that's not the aim. That is not the goal. We're trying to protect our water resources.
So to sum up, in short, DNR will begin issuing some sort of draft rules, and folks will be able to weigh in on those. I'm guessing Missouri DNR would probably be the best source of information going forward, right?
That's correct. Yes, sir.
And if folks want to learn a little bit more, or if folks want to contact you, what's the best way to get in contact with you?
They can call me, and I can provide you that number. Also, they can email me, and really email would probably be the best. And it's Cameron.Parker@house.mo.gov.
Well, thank you for that. And we could hear, and we heard 2 weeks ago from Governor Kehoe about exactly how important this legislation is to farmers. It turns out that it was quite a good year for not just groups like the Missouri Farm Bureau or Missouri Soybean, but really folks who need access to better healthcare plans and folks who are concerned with maintaining their water. So we appreciate you coming on, Representative Parker, and talking about this legislation.
Thank you so much for having me.
That was State Representative Cameron Parker from the Boot Heel of Missouri talking about water rights in the state of Missouri in 2025 and going forward. Speaking of water, it reminds me of a conversation that we had on our morning show here on Westplex Talk 104.5, the Brad and John Show, with station owner Brad Hildebrand. We talked at the end of 2024 about one of the most ridiculous rumors that we were hearing over the winter, which was that Missouri American Water was secretly held by a group of foreigners. Have a listen. Yesterday, you and I talked in A Block. When we were recapping shows on 93.3, we talked a little bit about Missouri American Water and also American Water. And Brad, there is a misconception out there that I mentioned and corrected in A Block yesterday, which is that Missouri American Water is owned by a German company. And a lot of very smart people, including you, Brad, still believed that as of yesterday. But, Brad, while we were right after we got off the air, I got a correction from the good folks at American Water, and they let me know that the German company RWE did own American Water from 2003 to 2008. And then it became a public company. That German company divested, Brad. They got rid of everything that had to do with American Water. And that company actually spun off in America and to become American Water Company. And it's publicly traded. So if you hear, there might be old websites or memes going around like, remember Geocities or maybe Myspace that has some kind of conspiracy about the Germans owning American Water and Missouri Water. No, American Water has been publicly traded since 2008. And this is the type thing, Brad, that the beauty of today's modern society is most people have access to Google. So before you go saying that a company is secretly owned by a foreign entity, you can always, in most cases, if you have access to Google, invest 35 to 45 seconds in looking up the facts of it. So shout out to the people from American Water and Missouri Water who pay attention to our show, who, Brad, there's some folks who listen to our show and are able to correct some of this misinformation.
Well, see, I'm not trying to say I was correct, but I was correct in saying that they were, you said a short period of time. You would just say 2003 to 2008? That they were.
Yeah, that's right. So for a 5-year period, which was 20 years ago, they owned American Water. You're right, Brad.
Well, but see, once again, I don't consider that to be a short period of time.
Okay, and we could split hairs for the whole segment. But Brad, let's go back to the fact that some people are saying, including Brad yesterday, that German entities own Missouri American Water, and in fact they don't. So yes, congratulations to us. We fixed a myth and we busted something that was incorrect, and we're helping people. Maybe, Brad, by doing this, we could encourage people to invest 35 to 45 seconds instead of spreading ridiculous anti-corporate myths. Maybe we can invest them to just, inspire them to be just a little bit better. You know what I'm saying, Brad? That was a clip from the Brad and John Show. Or as the great Brad Hildebrand would say, once again, that was a clip from the Brad and John Show, which you can hear every Monday through Friday on 104.5 FM Westplex Talk from 7 to 8 a.m. I say every Monday through Friday, but not this Monday. It's the first day of school, so I'm going to take the day off on Monday. You can visit Brad's website, one of his newest websites, at bradstop3.com. Brad recaps the top 3 stories that he presents in B Block during the Brad and John Show between 7 and 8 a.m. right here on Westplex Talk 104.5. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us. You can join us on Facebook by looking up Farm Show Radio. You can join us on Instagram by looking up Farm Show Radio. We'll be back right here next Saturday at 10 a.m. You're listening to Westplex Talk 104.5. We'll see you next Saturday.